In our last lesson, we spent some time reviewing inferences, making educated guesses about something that is not specifically stated by an author in a text. In this lesson, we are going to use supporting details as evidence to help support an inference in various kinds of texts. Let's take a look at this passage from Umbrella Summer by Lisa Graff and see if we can identify the best evidence to support the statement that the narrator doesn't like doing dangerous things. So before we do that, there are a couple of things that we need to note. Sometimes when you make claims or any other arguable statements, when you write, for example, you want to make sure that you are supporting those statements with specific details. And we call those details supporting evidence. So in this lesson, we're going to be spending some time learning how to support a claim, an inference, using evidence from the passage. So let's say that you are writing an essay about a fictional story, and you might make the claim that about a particular character. You want to make sure that the claim you make is supported with specifically stated evidence within the passage. So for example, you can make the claim that Patrick was not fearless, rather he took actions despite his fear. The supporting evidence that you can use is a quote from the passage. That quote is, "Patrick bit his nails anxiously. Finally, he took a deep breath, nodded to himself with determination, and burst into the room." Okay, so when we make the claim that Patrick was not fearless, well, obviously, our support is the fact that Patrick bit his nails anxiously. All right, so why is he biting his nails? It's because he's nervous about something. You know, he's got nerves, maybe he's fearful. Rather, he took actions despite his fear. How do we support that? Well, we can use, finally, he took a deep breath, nodded to himself with determination, and burst into the room. So even though he was anxious, he was biting his nails, he was fearful, he still took action. So our claim is proven, or is supported rather, with the statement that Patrick bit his nails, finally he took a deep breath, nodded to himself with determination, and burst into the room. So with that in mind, let's see if we can identify evidence that supports the claim that the narrator doesn't like doing dangerous things. If you started to squeeze your brakes right in the middle of heading down Maple Hill, just as you were passing old Mr. Normore's mailbox, you could coast into the bike rack in front of Loopy's Market without making a single tire squeak. That was the fastest way to go and the most fun too. I didn't do that anymore though. Now I hopped off my bike at the top of the hill and walked it. It took 5 minutes as long, but it was lots safer. I got to the store at 7:58. That's what it said on the clock inside. So when we consider the information presented in this passage, what evidence can we use to support the claim that the narrator of this story does not like doing dangerous things? Well, our best evidence is in the second paragraph. The narrator begins by saying, "I didn't do that anymore." Well, what's he talking about? Do what? I didn't do that anymore. Well, we're told what it was in the first paragraph. If you started to squeeze your brakes right in the middle of heading down Maple Hill, You could coast into the bike rack in front of Lippy's Market without making a single tire squeak. Okay? So the image that we get is you're riding a bike down a hill, and if you just barely squeeze the brakes, you would get down there and go right into the bike rack. So that's what he said he didn't do anymore. Now I hopped off my bike at the top of the hill and walked it. It took 5 times as long, but it was lots safer. So the fact that he says it was lots safer is a clue that he is more concerned with safety now. So that would be the best evidence that he does not like doing dangerous things. Just like literary texts, we will also use supporting evidence within an informational text to support claims or statements that we make about a particular passage. Now, we learned in earlier lessons, in a previous module, the difference between literary texts and informational texts. So literary texts are going to be things like short stories, novels, poems, just as an example. They could deal with historical things. Often literary texts tend to stay within the realm of fiction. An informational text, on the other hand, serves one purpose, and it is to provide the reader with information. So when we are using an informational text, we may need to make inferences about something that the author doesn't specifically say. So let's take a look at an example from Sweet Revolution by Adam Gopnik. Primates, I learned, love sweets for reasons that are simple enough to explain. Sweetness is the natural sign of ripeness and the best assurance, especially when balanced with just enough acids, that the thing you're eating is good to eat. Yet the picture is more complex. The primate instinct for sugar is particular, adjustable, and sometimes seasonal. The lesser mouse lemur of Madagascar, a gourmand among monkeys, raises its threshold during the rainy season so that when sugars are less abundant, it requires less sweetness. So based on this passage, we are going to look for the best evidence to support the statement that in nature, sweet foods are more likely to be safe and nutritious than bitter foods. Okay, so specifically what we're looking for are these sweet foods that animals will eat in nature tend to be safer to eat than the foods that are more bitter. So let's see if we can identify the specific evidence to support that claim. So we are told that the reasons that primates love sweets, because sweetness is the natural sign of ripeness and the best assurance, especially when balanced with just enough acids, that the thing you're eating is good to eat. Well, right off the bat, that seems like some good, solid evidence to support this idea that sweet foods are more likely to be safe and nutritious than bitter foods. Why do we say that? Because we are told that sweetness is the natural sign of ripeness and the best assurance that the thing you're eating is good to eat. So when we say that something is good to eat, we're not just talking about that it's tasty. We mean that it is safe to eat. So good to eat equals safe to eat. So based on this evidence, we can say with confidence that sweet foods are more likely to be safer to eat. In our last example, we're going to talk about how we can use the evidence that's presented by an author to trace an argument that he or she is trying to make. When an author is writing a persuasive essay or a persuasive article, the goal is to try to convince you as the reader to do something or believe something. So when they are arguing something, the goal is to persuade you to their side of the viewpoint. Typically in a persuasive essay, it's going to include a main claim, supporting claims, and evidence. So as readers, we are looking for evidence to support a claim that we make about a text we are reading. In a persuasive essay, if we're the ones writing it, we are providing the evidence to support our viewpoint and try to convince the reader to join us in our point of view. So first, the main claim is the author's central argument. So this is the statement that is being made. I agree with this. The author will then use supporting claims, which are the reasons that support the author's main claim. So we have a central argument, that is supported by supporting claims. So we can have claim 1, claim 2, claim 3, and so on. So the supporting claims are designed to be presented as additional claims that show that their main argument is true. Finally, authors will use evidence to back up the supporting claims. Typically, in a persuasive essay, we will see this in the form of facts or statistics. So, besides these parts of the essay, the author may use other strategies as well to try to persuade you to their side. For example, they may introduce an opposing claim. All right, and that is a claim that actually disagrees with the argument that they are making. So the author may use the opposing claim and give reasons why that claim is weak. So if they say, I believe that blue is the best color, somebody else might come along and say, no, red is better than blue. The author can actually look at the claims for supporting red and explain how those arguments just do not support this claim that red is better than blue. So, in other words, they will actually examine the main claim and the supporting claims in opposition to what they believe and make arguments based on the fact that they feel those claims just don't hold up. So what ends up happening? It makes their point of view, their argument, better or more plausible to the reader. Let's take a look at the first paragraph of a reading passage entitled Modern Museums and Money and see if we can determine the author's main claim or argument. In March 2018, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, known as the Met, began charging admission to non-New York residents. Until this time, entry into the Met was free, though voluntary donations were encouraged for visitors. The museum said the change was necessary, but many people were outraged. The Met was criticized for charging a fee for access to culture and the arts. In a perfect world, all museums would be free to the public. However, the reality is that museums often rely on funds from admission fees, and these fees don't necessarily stop people from visiting. Therefore, it is perfectly acceptable for museums to charge admission. So, what is the author's main claim in this passage? So our options are: it's okay for museums to charge admission fees to visitors, museums should receive more funding from the government, or people are right to demand museum access at no charge. Let's take a look at the information that is presented. So what kicks this off? The author begins by explaining how the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City started charging admission to non-New York residents. Prior to this, the Met was free to the public. Anybody could go in and look at the art and the culture that was presented in the museum. He then points out that the museum said the change was necessary. And there were many people who were outraged. He then goes on to say, in a perfect world, all museums would be free to the public. However, the reality is that museums often rely on funds from admission fees. Okay? So there are museums who need the funds from admission fees. So what is the claim that he is making? Based on the information that is presented, the author is saying that it's perfectly fine for museums to charge an admission fee. They are free to do that. So, the very last sentence in the first paragraph is actually the claim that he is making in this article. It is perfectly acceptable for museums to charge admission. So, of our choices, the first one is correct. The last sentence is the main claim. It is perfectly acceptable for museums to charge admission. Some of his supporting claims are also made in the introductory paragraph. One of the key ones is that museums often rely on funds from admission fees. With all things considered, it is okay for museums to charge admission fees to visitors is the main claim that the author is making in this passage.